Law. The current module is entitled Dalit Human Rights. The objectives of this module are to understand the plight of the Dalits in relation to the discourse on human rights. The author of this module is Umakant, an independent research scholar in New Delhi. I am Akash Singh Rathore from the Lewis University in Rome. When we speak about Dalit human rights, what we're doing is we're introducing one term or concept, the Dalits or the former untouchables of India, into a broader international discourse, which is the human rights discourse. 68 years after independence, the Dalits continue to fight for their basic human rights. 67 years after the proclamation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what we find is that there is a mismatch between the rights of the Dalit and the demands or obligations of upon states that they should protect the human rights of all persons and citizens. So what we find is that nearly 7 decades after both Indian independence and the UDHR, as we call it, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Dalits have yet been in a position largely to enjoy their human rights. The situation that exemplifies this is to be found in reports of census and reports of crime records. So what we're going to do in this module is, on the one hand, go through the certain data that we have available to us about the status of the Dalits all over the country, and then we're going to contrast this with the constitutional mechanisms, which are very favorable, in fact, and very progressive, which would seem to suggest that after these 7 decades, the Dalits should be in a far more advanced situation than we find them in today. In fact, Article 17 of the Constitution has the strongest prohibition of untouchability, and there are numerous penalties in force on to cover the possible atrocities against the scheduled castes or the Dalits, and a number of measures going even beyond the punitive to push forward the progress of the scheduled castes or the former untouchable community. So what we find is prohibitions of a practice of untouchability, penalizations against those who do commit such atrocities, and affirmative action, reservation policies for the uplifting of that community. All of these have been in effect for decades, and yet what the empirical data shows is that the progress that the Dalits have made, and unfortunately the humiliations they continue to suffer, are in a direct and gross violation of their human rights as articulated by the UN Declaration on Human Rights. So what we're going to do in this module is lay out these issues and then in the end suggest some possibility for how to overcome the problem. So let's start by discussing the status of Dalits in Indian society. The basic conception of social organization which prevails amongst the Hindus is believed to have started with the rise of 4 groups or varnas: Brahmins, the priestly and the educated class; Kshatriyas, the military class; Vaishyas, the trading class; and Shudras, the serving class. For a time, these were merely 4 groups. After a time, what were only groups or varnas became castes or jatis, and the 4 castes then multiplied into several subcastes. Thus, the ancient Varna system evolved into the modern caste system. According to Manu, the Hindu lawgiver, there were originally 4 Varnas, and the 4 they must remain. He was not going to admit the untouchables, who were supposed to be outside the 4-fold division of the caste system. That the untouchables who were to remain out of the Hindu social structure is clear from the name by which they are described, the Varna Bahyas, those outside the Varna system. They must remain separate and segregated from Hindu society. Thus, it is very clear from the citations made above that the position of untouchables in the Indian society has remained not only on the margin, but without any stake in the mainstream society. This is the main reason for discrimination and exclusion as faced by untouchables. However, by implication, those who are below the pollution line have been called panchamas, legitimized by the theory of karma and reincarnation. The panchamas deserve to be untouchables. Untouchability, with its manifold manifestations, is rooted in the motivation of purity and pollution. This is believed to have developed in the later Vedic period when Brahminical literature emerged in the form of Smritis and the Upanishads. In the later Vedic period text, the Chandalas are objects of spite and abhorrence. They exist at the lowest ritual and social level. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was of the view that segregation was the natural corollary to the ardently preached and widely shared beliefs in pollution, which in turn gave rise to several terms, such as Antajya, Antyavasan, and so on by the Hindu Shastras. The word Antya means not the end of creation, but the end of the village. The people who lived on the outskirts or the Antya of the village were the untouchables, who were called those accordingly. Ambedkar also made an observation that psychologically, caste and untouchability are one integral system based on the simple same principle. If caste Hindus observe untouchability, it's because they believe in caste. Untouchability is only an extension of the caste system. There can't be a severance between the two. Ambedkar went further to make an observation that the Indian village is the very negation of a republic. If it's a republic of the touchables, and by the touchables and for the touchables. It's a kind of colonialism of Hindus designed to exploit the untouchables. The untouchables have no rights. They are there only to serve and to submit. They have no rights because they're outside of village republics. This is a vicious circle, a fact that can't be gainsaid. So most Dalit victims of abuse are landless agricultural laborers across the country. Land is the prime asset in rural areas that determines an individual's standard of living and social status. Lack of access to land makes a Dalit community economically vulnerable. Their dependency is exploited by the upper and middle caste landlords and allow many abuses to go unpunished. Whenever Dalits have tried to organize themselves or assert their rights, there have been a backlash from the feudal lords, resulting in mass killing of Dalits, gang rapes, looting, and arsoning of Dalit hamlets. Whether caste clashes are social, economic, or political in nature, they're premised on the same basic principles. Any attempt to alter village customs or to demand land, increase wages, or political rights will inevitably lead to violence and economic retaliation from those most threatened by the changes in the status quo. We can turn specifically to the status of Dalit women, who suffer both on the count of their caste as well as gender. So in Human Rights Watch, it's been observed that singularly positioned at the bottom of India's caste system, the Dalits, as suffering from both caste and class discrimination. In other words, they're both outcast and they're impoverished, as well as gender discrimination. They're women. Dalit women, therefore, suffer a threefold discrimination: caste, class, and gender. They are largely uneducated. They're consistently paid less than their male counterparts. And Dalit women make up the majority of landless laborers and manual scavengers in the country, as well as a significant percentage of the women forced into prostitution in rural areas or sold to urban brothels. So we can see that as bad as the status of the Dalits as a whole are, Dalit women have to suffer a considerable portion of the violation of human rights due to the threefold basis for discrimination in caste, class, and gender. Commenting on the precarious situation of Dalit women, A.S. Jadhav argues that more than 80% of SC women, scheduled caste women, work in the agricultural sector. This sector is unorganized and does not have facilities of social security found in industries or organized sectors. What does this mean? Dalit women are not benefited by maternity, child leave, medical care, provident fund, or gratuity. The only caste and gender disaggregated crime report by the government of India is rape. So the only way that we can understand clearly who is the victim in terms of caste and so on is with the crime of rape. Notably, the National Human Rights Commission has stated that the number of rapes against scheduled caste women shows an increasing trend. Mass rape is used by upper caste militias as a weapon to break the morale of an entire community. Rape is used as a political instrument, and these women become the targets for anger and wrath of the dominant castes. So that is a National Human Rights Commission finding. It's not the finding of an NGO or Dalit agitators or anything like that. The NHRC has itself observed that rapes against scheduled caste women are on the rise, and that mass rapes are used to break the agitation of the Dalit communities. According to crime in India, if we go back over the last 15 years, about 30,000 cases of rape against Dalit women have been registered with the police. What does that mean? That means that on an average, more than 1,000 cases of rape against Dalit women have been registered with police across the country every year. That means more than 3 cases every single day. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There's a strong possibility that due to social taboos and an incompetent criminal justice system, a huge number of cases actually go unreported. Crime in India, 2014, reveals much broader parameters of crimes happening in India. With regard to crimes against Dalit women, the situation has become not only horrifying, but also shows how law is not able to contain growing violence in the absence of socio-cultural regeneration on issues related to status of Dalit women in Indian society. Several crimes reported with police stations in 2014 were as follows. So let's look at the Prevention of Atrocities Act and the kinds of crimes that were reported. Rape under Section 376 of the Indian Penal Code, that's the IPC, 233. This is just one year, last year. Attempt to commit rape, 87. Assault on a scheduled caste woman to outrage her modesty, almost 2,500 cases. Sexual harassment, almost 1,000 cases. Insult to modesty, 50 cases. Assault or use of criminal force with the intent to disrobe, 150 cases. Voyeurism, 15. Stalking, 100. Kidnapping and abduction, 500, and so on. So on the other hand, in IPC crimes where the Prevention of Atrocities Act was not applied, the cases are just as large. So attempt to commit rape, to outrage modesty, assault with the use of criminal force, and so on. So what we see is that either with the Prevention of Atrocities Act or without the Prevention of Atrocities Act, crime in India in 2014 witnessed thousands and upon thousands of cases of criminality of lower or higher degrees that are targeting specifically Dalit women. So in 1 year itself, the graph of crimes against Dalit women has grown in such a menacing way that the figures related to different kinds of crime should compel the law enforcement agencies to find ways and means for due diligence and also fix accountability for willful negligence on part of the duty bearers. That is, of course, a basic understanding of the principles of human rights and their enforcement. A study on violence against Dalit women based on interviews with 500 Dalit women and girl children, survivors of violence from 1999 to 2004 across AP, Bihar, Tamil Nadu, and UP, has revealed a range of causal factors for violence in the general community directly attributed to systemic caste, class, gender factors that ascribe Dalit women a very low status in society and complete disempowerment and exploitation. The most common causal factor for violence against Dalit women in the general community is their perceived sexual availability by dominant caste men, who target them for sexual violence ranging from sexual harassment to assault, rape, exploitation, and forced prostitution. Moreover, any attempt by Dalit women to assert their fundamental right to equality in any sphere, whether that be social, cultural, economic, civil, and political, is met with violence from the dominant caste. Dalit women's lack or denial of access to land and other economic resources is reinforced through the violence that they must endure. This ensures their economic subordination, forcing them to be retained as an exploitable labor force for their dominant caste employers. Now, I'm going to make a quotation from certain sociological studies that introduce another aspect of this, which seems quite strange to still be present in the year 2015. And here is the quotation. One specific form of violence against Dalit women that fails to be recorded in official government statistics as a crime against women is the practice of Devdasi, or the Jogini system of ritualized, religiously sanctioned prostitution. Divine prostitution, or the practice of dedicating a woman to a deity as a sacred body, has been a part of customary practice in India for a long time. The powerful section of society encouraged this custom to exploit women on the pretext of religion and rituals. The divine prostitutes ultimately become sex objects of a dominant person or group. This reprehensible practice continues even today as Dalits and other weaker sections of society are compelled to allow this exploitation in the face of their extreme poverty. Thousands of Dalit girls between the ages of 6 and 13 are dedicated to temple deities, particularly in the states of AP, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Odisha. Once dedicated, the Devdasi or Jogini girl is unable to marry and is instead forced to become a prostitute for the temple priests, the dominant caste village elders, or for all men in the village. In the state of AP alone, a field study conducted in 2003 across 12 Jogini-prone districts in the state established the presence of 25,000 Joginis in these districts alone. Approximately 90% were living in the poorest region of Telangana, and almost 90% belonged to the Dalit community. This situation bears testimony to the inadequate implementation of the AP Devdasi Prohibition of Dedication Act 1988, with the action plan of the Social Welfare Department, Government of AP, which has identified a target of more than 1,000 Joginis for rehabilitation to other less degrading occupations. Implementation of law as well as rehabilitation of liberated Devdasis in several states has failed completely. The practice is far from dead. The dedication ceremonies have shifted from main temples to the homes of priests or to smaller temples with no publicity or fanfare. A study undertaken in Karnataka revealed that loopholes in the law make it difficult to take legal action against the offenders, while victims do not come forward to complain for fear of social condemnation. Karnataka has not registered a single case against priests under the Karnataka Devdasi Prohibition of Dedication Act, despite numerous complaints and admonitions. Girls from the lower castes continue to be dedicated by ignorant and vulnerable parents with the connivance of the priests. Let's turn to the economic status of Dalits. The scheduled castes, the SCs, lag far behind the upper caste population as far as the question of livelihood and economic prosperity is concerned. This has been revealed in a recent National Sample Survey Organization, NSSO, report which was entitled Employment and Unemployment Situation Among Social Groups in India 2011 and 12. This report, based on a survey conducted during July 2011 to June 2012, informs that the proportion of rural households with regularly wage-salaried as a major source of income was the highest among others, in other words, the forward caste category, followed by OBC and then SC and then ST. So the proportion of rural households with casual labor as the major source of income was much higher among the SCs. So that means more than, well over 52%. So regular or wage or salaried employment is only the case for 8% of SCs and so-called casual labor for well over half of the SCs. So what does this tell us? It means that the SC households are more vulnerable vis-a-vis the others or upper caste households in terms of stability of income and employment. The proportion of households possessing and cultivating land of 4 hectares or more was the highest for the upper castes, again followed by the OBC ST and then at the end the SC. Another report, Household Consumer Expenditure Across Socioeconomic Groups, which is based on the NSS 68th round survey, indicates that in the rural areas, the average monthly per capita expenditure, that's called MPCE, is highest among the upper caste households, that's 53%, and then coming all the way down to less than 20% for the SCs. Inadequate access to agricultural land and capital, for example, to be used for self-employment, leaves no options to the SC workers except to resort to manual wage labor. Consequently, there's an enormously high level of manual wage laborers, almost 60%, as compared to only 1/3 for other groups. Disparities in the incidence of wage laborers are evident in urban areas as well. The proportion of casual laborers among SCs is around 1/3 as against only 10% among others. So what we see then from the economic status and the way they're forced into various kinds of labor is that beyond doubt, the historical impact of traditional caste-based restrictions on ownership of property in employment and occupation are still visible in significant measure. The access of Dalits to income-earning capital assets in employment is limited, and their segregation as manual labor is overwhelmingly high. The 2 prime economic attributes of the caste system operate even today. So we move then to the socio-educational profile of Dalits. Dalits have been the worst sufferers in the exploitative social order. There is no sphere of life where they are accorded equality in interactions with superiors in the caste hierarchy. Dalits work on land but cannot claim it. They perform services essential to the maintenance of society but are ranked lowest in the social hierarchy. They produce material for consumption but are considered beyond touch. Segregation and exploitation have been their fate. As Dr. Ambedkar said, as opposed to the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, the Hindu social order is based on the principles of graded inequality and the fixity of occupations as well as people within their respective classes. Education is as important a means of reducing ignorance and inequality as society can possibly know. It helps the individual to raise his or her social status in various ways. Knowledge, skills, values, and attitude acquired through education helps one to lead the desired quality of life. Knowledge must be made available to all. Ambedkar further opined that in the complex world man lives at his peril and he must find his way in it without losing his freedom. There can, under these circumstances, be no freedom that is worthwhile unless the mind is trained to use its freedom. Deprive a man of knowledge and you will make him inevitably the slave of those more fortunate than himself. Deprivation of knowledge is denial of the power to use liberty for great ends. An ignorant man may be free, but he cannot employ his freedom so as to give him the assurance of happiness. So these are the ideas behind pedagogy, but let's see what the facts are. Despite the professed government focus on SC education, the literacy rate for SCs across India continues to be lower than that of all other castes. We can look at the 2011 census and see that the SC literacy rate was 66%, with 62% in rural and 76% in urban areas. This is far lower than the 73% overall literacy rate. Gender-wise, the scenario is worse. The literacy rate for SC women is 56%, while that of SC men overall is 75%. Women in general, 65%. Men in general, 81%. So in every case, it's lower than 66%. So what we found is that in every case, the literacy rates of the Dalits is always below 6%, at least below the rest of the population. The gross enrollment ratio for scheduled caste children in education today is actually reasonably high. It tends to drop, however, as the grade or the class increases. And gender disparities also remain. The enrollment ratios drop very significantly at the senior secondary levels for SC students. Only 70% and then 38% of them make it to classes 11 and 12. Now finally, if we move on to caste atrocities, we see that this is a recurrent feature. Caste atrocities cannot be seen as a case of isolated incidents happening once in a while. As a matter of fact, such atrocities are committed on Dalits on a daily basis. According to the report prepared by the National Crimes Record Bureau, a crime against Dalit is committed every 20 minutes in this country. The figures mentioned above clearly establish the harsh reality. These numbers are only for cases that were registered with the police. It is also common knowledge that all incidents of atrocity, untouchability, or any other crime committed against Dalits do not reach police stations owing to several factors. Despite that, the numbers being reported are very high, and the National Human Rights Commission is concerned with the growing atrocities on Dalits. The National Human Rights Commission has commented, and I quote, "The atrocities against persons belonging to these groups and the frequency with which they occur is a cause for disquiet. The humiliation which persons belonging to the scheduled castes suffer even today, more than half a century after India proclaimed itself to be a republic, is a matter of shame. Untouchability is not an ancient cultural artifact, but a day-to-day living experience for Dalit communities. These are reported in the news, recorded by the state, and are also a subject of study by academics, NGOs, and others." So to summarize and to conclude this module, what we've been looking at are various domains and aspects where the Dalit community has clearly not been able to enjoy the constitutional rights or the privileges that are supposed to be granted over the last 7 decades, either through the Indian Constitution or through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The spheres we discussed were the social sphere, then we turned to gender and the condition of the Dalit women. We also concentrated on education, especially the secondary schooling of children. We turned to the economic status overall of the Dalits, the labor condition, and we concluded by looking at the issue of crime, criminality, and atrocities perpetrated against the Dalits. What we find in all of these cases is that the facts and figures which are collected by the government itself are evidence of the refusal of the government to implement the very conditions and commands made by the state through the Constitution and subsequent legislative acts and orders. So what we see is that almost 7 years after the formation of the Republic, the Dalits have not been in a position to enjoy their basic human rights. Now, the Human Rights Charter is understood to manifest human rights over recent history through 3 generations. We refer to the first generation as the civil and political rights, the second generation as socioeconomic rights, and the third generation referred to as the green generation of rights, as both environmental but also various aspects of cultural and group rights, certain robust conception of that. Now let's look at the Dalits in relation to these generations of human rights. It's clear from what we said about the status of the Dalits within India overall that they have not been able to fully enjoy their civil and political rights. Now, while there is a great opportunity for representation at the voting booths, this representation doesn't seem to translate into the implementation of legislation at the administrative level. What about the second generation of rights, the social and economic? Well, it's quite clear in our discussion of the social condition of the Dalits and the economic inequality of the Dalits that they haven't been able to enjoy the benefits of the second generation of rights either. Well, what about then this third generation, or the recognition in a robust sense of group or community rights? Haven't we had almost 7 decades of positive discrimination, reverse discrimination, affirmative action, or what we refer to as reservation? Unfortunately, the situation that results from the policies of reservation is that a small community of the scheduled castes have managed to enjoy the majority of the benefits. The ability to distribute the benefits of reservation widely to the most disadvantaged communities has achieved. So what we find is that in the 7 decades history of post-independence India, the Dalits have been at social, political, economic, cultural, religious disadvantages. They have far less land and property than the other castes, and as a consequence they're forced into an unregulated labor market where they're victims of exploitation. Women experience special forms of exploitation due to the triple burden of caste, class, and gender. And the children, of course, have to be tended to by the adults as the educational system has largely failed them, as we find the rates of dropout by the time of graduation is as high as 2/3. So in short, the situation of Dalit human rights is that Dalits have not been able to enjoy their human rights. The fundamental human right, the very basic concept out of which it arises, is the concept of human dignity, which is recognized in the inviolability of human dignity in many international charters and declarations of human rights. Unfortunately, the case today is that Dalits have not been able to enjoy this most fundamental of human rights, and it is a question of when they will be able to enjoy their dignity. Thank you.